The ancient chamber of the Galactic Council stretched upward into darkness, its walls carved from stone that had witnessed 10,000 years of decisions that shaped the fate of worlds. Representatives from 17 different species sat in their designated sections, each one adapted to their unique biological needs. Some breathed methane, others existed in liquid suspension, and a few required complete darkness to function. But today, all of them had gathered for the same reason: to discuss the newest species to join the galactic community. Humanity had achieved faster than light. Traveled just 3 years ago, their first vessels were crude things compared to the elegant ships of the elder races. Held together with what some called primitive engineering and others called stubborn determination. They had made contact with the Manhall Collective first, then the Cirith Empire, and finally the Galactic Council itself. They came with open hands and curious minds, asking questions about everything, wanting to learn, wanting to trade, wanting to find their place among the stars. Most of the council saw them as children taking their first steps into a larger world, amusing, harmless, perhaps even useful as a source of cheap labor or exotic goods from their resource-rich home system. Elder Vorith of the Ketheri saw something else entirely. He rose from his seat slowly, his 4 eyes scanning the assembly with the weight of 3,000 years of accumulated memory. The Kethari were among the oldest spacefaring species in the known galaxy. They had watched empires rise and fall, had seen wars that consumed entire star systems, had witnessed the extinction of species that once thought themselves invincible. Varath himself had been alive when the Torvani hegemony was nothing more than a collection of warring tribes on a single planet. "You must listen to me," Varath said, his voice carrying through the chamber's perfect acoustics. "I have spent decades studying these humans. I've analyzed their history, their wars, their cultural development. What I have found fills me with deep concern." Ambassador Crix of the Torvani hegemony made a sound that the translators identified as contempt. He was a massive creature, standing nearly 3 meters tall, his exoskeleton gleaming under the chamber lights. The Torvani had conquered 40 star systems through military force. They feared nothing and respected only strength. "Oh, what could possibly concern you about these primitives?" Crix asked. "They have barely learned to leave their own planet. Their ships are slow, their weapons are weak, and their numbers are insignificant. The hegemony alone commands a fleet of 10,000 warships. What threat could humans possibly pose?" Vorith's tendrils curled in a gesture of frustration that his species made when dealing with those who refused to see obvious danger. "You measure threat only in terms of current military capability. This is a mistake. The humans are different from any species we have encountered before." "Different how?" asked Counselor Thex of the MAL Collective, genuinely curious. "They do not forget," Vorith said simply. "They do not forgive." Their entire history is a testament to this truth. When one group of humans wrongs another, the wronged party pursues justice, or what they call justice, across generations. Across centuries. They pass their grievances from parent to child like sacred inheritances. They build monuments to their suffering so that future generations will remember and continue the fight. The chamber filled with sounds of amusement. The Cirith delegates hissed with laughter. The Torvani clicked their mandibles in mockery. Even the usually stoic representatives of the crystalline accord pulsed with colors that indicated dismissive humor. "You speak as if this is something to fear," Crix said. "Holding grudges is a sign of weakness, not strength. A truly powerful species simply crushes its enemies and moves on. These humans sound like they waste their energy on emotional responses rather than practical expansion." Vorith felt the cold grip of despair. He had known this would happen. The younger species never listened to warnings until it was too late. "You do not understand. The humans do not merely hold grudges. They pursue them with a focus and determination that borders on obsession. I have records of human conflicts that lasted for decades over insults that occurred centuries before any of the participants were born. They hunted criminals across their entire planet for years, never stopping, never giving up. They built weapons capable of destroying their own world multiple times over. simply because they refused to let their enemies feel safe. And yet they nearly destroyed themselves in the process, Crix pointed out. They are emotional, irrational, and self-destructive. These are not the qualities of a species we need to worry about. They survived, Vorith said quietly. Despite everything, despite the wars and the weapons and the conflicts that should have ended them 100 times over, they survived. They learned. They grew stronger. And now they are here, among us, with all that history still burning inside them. The council moved to a vote. The matter at hand was simple. Should humanity be granted provisional membership in the Galactic Council, with limited rights and responsibilities befitting their newcomer status? The vote passed easily, with even Vorith supporting it. He had no objection to humanity joining the community of spacefaring species. His concern was how they would be treated once they were members. He requested a private addendum to the record, a formal warning that he hoped would be remembered if his fears proved justified. I urge all species to treat humanity with respect and fairness. Do not mistake their curiosity for weakness. Do not mistake their friendliness for submission. And above all, do not give them cause for vengeance. Because if you do, they will pursue it until one of you is destroyed. And looking at their history, I do not believe it will be them. The addendum was noted and filed away, forgotten almost immediately by everyone except Vorath himself. On Earth, in a secure facility buried deep beneath a mountain, Commander Lisa Grant watched a recording of the council session with cold, calculating eyes. Human intelligence operatives had managed to place surveillance devices in the chamber decades ago. Back when humanity was still believed to be centuries away from space travel, the galaxy's arrogance had given humanity an advantage they intended to keep. Captain Daniel Cole stood beside her, his arms crossed over his chest. He was a veteran of the resource wars that had nearly torn Earth apart 2 generations ago. And he recognized the look on his commander's face. It was the look of someone preparing for trouble. They think we are primitives, Lisa said quietly. They think we are weak, harmless, beneath their notice. Right. Daniel nodded slowly. The Torvani especially. Did you see how their ambassador dismissed the Elder's warning? He practically laughed in the old one's face. Lisa turned off the recording and sat in silence for a long moment. The Elder understands us. He sees what we really are. But the others, they have never faced anything like humanity before. They have conquered species that surrendered when they realized they were outmatched. They have negotiated with species that valued survival over pride. They have never encountered a species that would rather burn everything to ash than accept defeat. Should we be worried? Daniel asked. Lisa shook her head. Not yet. We will be peaceful. We will be friendly. We will trade and learn and grow stronger with each passing year. And we will remember every slight, every insult, every moment of disrespect. She stood and walked toward the door. Because if they ever give us a real reason to show them what humanity is capable of, we will be ready. And they will learn why the Elder tried to warn them. Daniel watched her go, then turned back to the frozen image of Ambassador Crix on the screen. The Torvani looked so confident, so certain of his superiority. He had no idea what was coming. 2 years passed like water flowing through open fingers. Humanity spread into the stars with careful, measured steps. They established colonies on worlds that no other species wanted, planets that were too cold, too hot, too dry, or too far from the comfortable trade routes that connected the great powers. They asked for nothing except the right to exist. Peacefully in their small corner of the galaxy, the colony on Kepler 4, for 2b, was called New Haven. It sat on a world covered mostly in shallow oceans and scattered islands, a place where the sunsets painted the sky in shades of purple and gold that artists traveled across light years to capture on canvas. 12,000 humans called it home, a mix of scientists, farmers, teachers, and families who had left Earth seeking a quieter life among the stars. Lieutenant Emma Walsh had come to New Haven to escape the memories of war. She had served in the last great conflict on Earth, had seen things that still haunted her dreams, and had hoped that building something new on a distant world would help her find peace. She worked in the Colonial Defense Force, though in truth there was little defending to do. New Haven had no enemies, no strategic value, nothing that anyone would want badly enough to fight for, or so she believed. The Torvani, hegemony, had watched humanity's expansion with growing irritation. These primitives were spreading faster than expected, claiming worlds that might one day become valuable as the hegemony's own territory expanded. More importantly, their very existence was an insult. A species so young, so weak, so clearly inferior, daring to plant their flag on worlds that should belong to the strong. Admiral Crix, now elevated to supreme military commander of the hegemony, decided to end a message, not just to humanity, but to every species in the galaxy that might be watching. A reminder of what happened to those who forgot their place in the natural order of things. He chose New Haven specifically because it was defenseless. The colony had no warships, no orbital defenses, barely even a handful of ground-based weapons designed to handle wildlife threats. It would fall quickly, easily, and the images of its destruction would spread across the galaxy as a warning. The attack came on a Tuesday morning, local time. Emma was running evacuation drills with her small team when the first Torvani ships appeared in orbit. There was no warning, no declaration of war, no demand for surrender. One moment the sky was clear and peaceful. The next, it was filled with fire. The bombardment lasted for 3 hours. Torvani warships rained plasma fire down on the surface with methodical precision, targeting residential areas, schools, hospitals, the places where people gathered in the greatest numbers. Emma watched helplessly as the town square where she had eaten breakfast that morning was reduced to a smoking crater. She watched the hospital where her best friend worked collapse into rubble. She watched children running through the streets, trying to find their parents, disappearing in flashes of green light. And then the ground forces came. The Torvani soldiers took their time with the survivors. They had been given specific orders to make an example, to ensure that the images broadcast from New Haven would be so horrible that no human would ever forget them. They succeeded beyond their darkest expectations. The things they did to the colonists were beyond what any sane mind could imagine. Acts of cruelty designed not just to kill, but to terrorize. To break the spirit of an entire species, they broadcast everything on open channels. Laughing and joking as they worked, Emma survived because she was buried under the rubble of a collapsed building. Her left arm crushed beyond saving, her body broken but somehow still breathing. She lay there for 16 hours, listening to the screams of her neighbors, the laughter of the Torvani soldiers, the sound of a world dying around her, a civilian transport ship. The Morning Star had been conducting routine supply runs when the attack began. Its captain, a man named Gregory Palmer, made a choice that would later be called either incredibly brave or incredibly foolish. He turned his ship around and flew directly into the destruction. Searching for survivors, he found 40-7 people out of 12,000. 47 survivors to tell the story of what had happened on New Haven. 47 witnesses to carry the memory of their murdered families. Friends and neighbors back to Earth. Emma was the last one pulled from the rubble, more dead than alive. The medical team on the Morning Star amputated what remained of her left arm and kept her breathing through sheer determination. She woke 3 days later to find Gregory sitting beside her bed, his face gray with exhaustion. "How many?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. Gregory could not meet her eyes. 47, including you." Emma closed her eyes and felt something inside her change, something fundamental and permanent. The woman who had come to New Haven seeking peace was gone. In her place was someone new, someone forged in fire and loss and rage. On Earth. The news spread faster than anyone could contain it. The Torvani had broadcast their atrocities proudly, thinking to inspire fear. Instead, they inspired something far more dangerous. President Nathan Hughes addressed the world from the steps of the United Nations building. His face carved from stone, his voice steady despite the fury burning in his eyes. Behind him stood representatives from every nation on Earth, united for the first time in human history by a common enemy. 2 days ago, the Torvani hegemony attacked our colony on Kepler 4 for it to be without warning, without provocation, without mercy. They murdered 12,000 of our people. Men, women, children, the elderly, the sick, the innocent. He paused. And when he continued, his voice had dropped to something cold and terrible. They broadcast their crimes for the galaxy to see. They laughed while our families burned. They thought this would make us afraid. He looked directly into the cameras, and billions of humans looked back at him. They were wrong. The Torvani hegemony has made an error that they will not live long enough to regret. We do not forget. We do not forgive. And we do not stop. In the Galactic Council chamber, Elder Voreth watched the broadcast with growing dread. He had tried to warn them. He had begged them to leave humanity alone, to treat them with respect, to never give them a reason to show what they were truly capable of. No one had listened, and now, watching the cold determination in the human president's eyes, Voreth understood that something terrible had been set in motion. The galaxy had poked a sleeping predator, and it was waking up hungry for blood. He began composing a message to the Torvani leadership, urging them to apologize, to offer reparations, to do anything that might calm the storm they had unleashed. But even as he wrote the words, he knew it was already too late. Humanity had been given a reason, and they would never forget. The galaxy expected humanity to crumble. Every species that had ever faced the Torvani hegemony had followed the same pattern. Initial outrage, followed by desperate diplomacy, followed by inevitable surrender. The hegemony controlled 40 star systems and commanded a fleet of 10,000 warships. Humanity had barely established themselves on a dozen worlds, and their military consisted of a few hundred vessels that were generations behind Torvani technology. The math was simple. The outcome was certain. Within a year, perhaps two, humanity would come crawling to the negotiating table, begging for mercy, accepting whatever scraps of survival the Torvani chose to offer them. This is what the galaxy expected. What the galaxy got was silence. In the 18 months following the New Haven massacre, humanity went dark. They recalled their diplomats from the Galactic Council. They closed their borders to all outside traffic. They stopped responding to communications from other species. Their colony worlds went quiet. Their ships disappeared from the trade routes, and their presence in galactic affairs simply ceased to exist. The Torvani assumed they were hiding. The male collective assumed they were mourning. The Sirith Empire assumed they were building up the courage to surrender. Elder Voreth assumed they were preparing for war. He was right. Deep within Earth's solar system, hidden behind the massive bulk of Jupiter, something was being built. The largest construction project in human history was taking shape in absolute secrecy, powered by the combined resources of every nation on the planet and fueled by a cold, patient rage that burned hotter with each passing day. Admiral Patricia Holloway stood on the observation deck of the construction station, watching as another warship emerged from the assembly lines. She was 62 years old, a veteran of 3 wars on Earth before the Torvani attack, and she had been chosen to lead the Retribution fleet because she understood something that many younger officers did not. Revenge was not about emotion. It was about patience. "Status report," she said without turning around. Commander Samuel Hunt, executive officer, stepped forward with a tablet in his hands. "The 300th ship completed assembly this morning. All vessels are fully armed, fully crewed, and ready for deployment. The fleet is operational, Admiral. 300 warships. Not the crewed vessels that humanity had first taken into space, held together with hope and determination. These were something new. Something designed from the ground up with a single purpose, to destroy the Torvani hegemony. Every weapon system, every piece of armor, every line of code had been created by engineers who had lost someone at New Haven. Every crew member was a volunteer who had watched the broadcast of the massacre and sworn an oath to make the Torvani pay. Every ship carried the name of one of the 12,000 dead, a reminder of why they were here and what they were fighting for. The flagship was called Vengeance. Patricia turned to face her officer. What is the status of Torvani defenses? Samuel pulled up a holographic display showing the 40 star systems of the hegemony. Their fleet is spread thin, as we expected. They never anticipated a serious response from us, so they have maintained their standard patrol patterns. Most of their heavy warships are concentrated near their core worlds, with only light garrison forces protecting the outer systems and their command structure. Supreme Commander Crix remains in overall control. He has been celebrating the New Haven victory extensively. Intelligence reports suggest he considers the human problem to be solved. Patricia allowed herself a small, cold smile. He is about to learn otherwise. The Retribution fleet launched 3 days later. 300 warships, moving in perfect formation, dropped out of faster-than-light travel at the edge of the Torvani outer territories. They did not announce themselves. They did not issue demands. They did not offer the chance for surrender. They simply began to destroy. The first target was a military outpost on a moon orbiting a gas giant. The Torvani garrison had approximately 2 hours of warning before the human fleet arrived. They spent most of that time trying to confirm that the sensor readings were accurate, unable to believe that the primitive humans had somehow assembled a force capable of threatening them. The battle lasted 12 minutes. The human ships were faster, more maneuverable, and equipped with weapons that the Torvani had never seen before. Energy shields that should have stopped any attack flickered and died under concentrated fire. Armor that had been considered impenetrable melted like ice in a furnace. The garrison sent out a distress call that was cut short mid-transmission. When the fleet moved on, nothing remained but wreckage. The pattern repeated across the outer systems. Military installations, shipyards, weapons factories. Anything that could be used to wage war was systematically located and destroyed. The human fleet moved with surgical precision, striking fast, hitting hard, and vanishing before reinforcements could arrive. Supreme Commander Crix received reports of the attacks with growing disbelief. He had expected humans to be emotional, irrational, easy to predict. Instead, they were cold, methodical, and devastatingly effective. Every strike seemed to know exactly where Torvani defenses were weakest. Every attack targeted exactly what the hegemony could least afford to lose. He ordered his fleet to consolidate, to form defensive positions around the core worlds. He sent messages to the Galactic Council demanding intervention, claiming that humanity was committing war crimes, violating every convention of civilized warfare. The Council received his messages and did nothing. Elder Voreth had made sure of that. He had spent the months of human silence, reminding every species on the Council of what the Torvani had done at New Haven. He had shown them the broadcasts, the recordings of laughing soldiers and dying children, the evidence of atrocities that went beyond anything the galaxy had seen in centuries. You wanted this, Voreth told Crix's diplomatic representative. You attacked an innocent colony to send a message. Well, humanity is sending a message now, and the Council has no interest in stopping them. The representative fled the chamber in terror, back on the vengeance. Admiral Holloway reviewed the latest intelligence reports with her command staff. The Torvani fleet was pulling back to their core worlds, abandoning the outer systems to concentrate their defenses, exactly as she had predicted. Admiral Samuel said, "We are receiving surrender requests from several Torvani outer colonies. They are offering unconditional capitulation in exchange for their lives." Patricia looked at the messages scrolling across her screen. Pleas for mercy. Promises of cooperation. Offers of information about hegemony defenses. She deleted them all. "We do not accept surrenders," she said quietly. "Not from them. Not ever. Continue the operation." The Retribution fleet pressed deeper into Torvani space, and the galaxy watched in horrified fascination as humanity showed them exactly what Elder Voreth had tried to warn them about. They did not forget, they did not forgive, and they would not stop until they were satisfied. Elder Voreth had lived for 3,000 years. He had watched civilizations rise from primitive beginnings to galactic prominence. He had witnessed wars that consumed entire star systems and peace treaties that lasted for centuries. He had seen species evolve, adapt, and sometimes fade into extinction. In all that time, he had never felt the kind of fear that gripped him now. The Torvani hegemony was burning. Reports came in every day, each one worse than the last. The human fleet had pushed deep into hegemony space, systematically destroying every military target in their path. Shipyards that had taken generations to build were reduced to rubble in hours. Defense stations that had held back invasions from powerful enemies crumbled under human weapons fire. The once mighty Torvani navy, 10,000 warships strong, had been cut in half and was still shrinking. Supreme Commander Crix had stopped sending requests to the Galactic Council. There was no point. Everyone knew that the Council had chosen to let humanity have their revenge, and no amount of begging would change that decision. Vorath understood why the Council was staying out of the conflict. He had made sure they understood the full extent of Torvani crimes at New Haven, but understanding why something was happening did not make it any easier to watch. The Cathari Elder found himself spending long hours staring at star maps, watching the progress of the human fleet, wondering how far they would go and what would be left when they were finished. He needed to speak with them. He needed to understand what was driving them, what would satisfy them, what it would take to end this war before it consumed everything in its path. And so he sent a request to the human ambassador to the Galactic Council, asking for a private audience. The request was granted. Ambassador Kevin Price arrived at Vorath's private chambers, exactly on time. He was younger than Vorath had expected, perhaps 40 human years old, with brown hair going gray at the temples and eyes that carried a weight far beyond his age. He wore a simple, dark suit, no military decorations, no signs of rank or status. Just a man representing his species. They sat across from each other in Vorath's study, surrounded by artifacts from civilizations that had died before humanity had learned to make fire. The room was silent, except for the soft hum of environmental systems keeping both of them comfortable. "Thank you for agreeing to meet with me," Vorath said. "I imagine you are quite busy these days." Kevin nodded slightly. "The fleet sends regular reports. I review them, pass relevant information to the Council, and prepare for whatever comes next. It keeps me occupied." "I tried to warn them," Vorath said suddenly, the words coming out before he could stop them. "Before any of this happened, before New Haven, before the war, I studied your species for decades. I saw what you were capable of. I told them to leave you alone, to treat you with respect, to never give you a reason to show your true nature. And they did not listen. No, they thought themselves superior. They believed that technology and numbers would protect them from consequences. They looked at your young civilization and saw weakness instead of potential." Vorath's tendrils curled in a gesture of regret. Crix especially. He was so certain that destroying New Haven would break your spirit, would make you afraid, would teach you your place in the galaxy. Kevin was silent for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was calm and measured. "Can I tell you something about human history, Elder?" Vorath nodded. "Thousands of years ago, there was a great empire on our world called Rome. It was the most powerful civilization of its era, controlling vast territories and commanding armies that seemed unbeatable. One of their greatest enemies was a city called Carthage, which they fought in a series of brutal wars." Kevin leaned forward slightly. "After the final war, Rome did not simply defeat Carthage. They burned it to the ground. They killed or enslaved every inhabitant. They salted the earth so nothing would ever grow there again. And then they made it illegal to even speak the name of Carthage, trying to erase it from history entirely." Vorath listened in growing horror. "Another example," Kevin continued. "During what we call World War II, an enemy nation attacked a military base called Pearl Harbor. The attack killed approximately 2,000 people. In response, humanity developed and used nuclear weapons for the first time, destroying 2 entire cities and killing hundreds of thousands. The nation that attacked us surrendered unconditionally and spent decades rebuilding under our supervision. You are saying that the Torvani attack was nothing unusual by human standards." Kevin shook his head. "I am saying that the Torvani attack was a mistake beyond anything they can comprehend. 12,000 innocent people were murdered while their killers laughed and broadcast the atrocities for the galaxy to see. Children were hunted through the streets. Families were tortured for entertainment, and the Torvani thought this would make us afraid. He stood and walked to the window, looking out at the stars. We are not afraid. We are angry. And we will pursue that anger until every shipyard that built the vessels that attacked New Haven is dust. Until every soldier who set foot on that colony is dead. Until every factory that produced the weapons used against our people is nothing but rubble and ash. Voroth felt something cold settling in his chest. How far will you go? How long will this continue? Kevin turned to face him. Until we are satisfied? Not until we feel better. Not until we have mourned. Until we are satisfied that the debt has been paid in full. And if another species were to make the same mistake? The human ambassador walked back to his chair and sat down. Then I hope they remember what happened to the Torvani, because we will not give them another warning. We will not negotiate. We will not offer terms. He met Voreth's 4 eyes without flinching. We will simply do to them what we are doing to the hegemony now, and we will not stop until we are done. Voreth sat in silence for a long moment after Kevin left. The human's words echoed in his mind, mixing with memories of the research he had conducted over decades. The patterns he had seen in human history, the warnings he had tried so desperately to give. He understood now why the galaxy needed to know. Not just the facts of what humanity was doing, but the truth of what humanity was. A species that carried its grievances like sacred flames, passing them from generation to generation, never allowing the fire to dim. A species that did not forget, did not forgive, and did not stop until they were satisfied. The elder began composing a message. Not to the Torvani, who were beyond help, but to every other species in the galaxy. A warning backed by undeniable evidence, a lesson written in the blood of a dying empire. Do not harm humanity. Do not threaten them. Do not give them cause for vengeance, because if you do, they will come for you with a patience that outlasts stars and a determination that breaks worlds. This time, Voreth hoped, the galaxy would listen. 50 years passed like the slow turning of a great wheel. The Torvani hegemony still existed, but only as a shadow of what it had once been. Where 40 star systems had once answered to Supreme Commander Crix, now only 7 remained. Where 10,000 warships had once patrolled the borders of a great empire, a handful of patrol vessels maintained order in systems that posed no threat to anyone. The hegemony had been reduced from a galactic power to a minor regional presence. Their military capacity permanently restricted by treaties that humanity had dictated and the Galactic Council had enforced. Crix himself had not survived to see the end of the war. He had died on the bridge of his flagship during the final battle for the Torvani homeworld, still refusing to surrender, still believing that somehow the hegemony would prevail. His death had not brought satisfaction to humanity. It had simply been noted, recorded, and filed away as one more item on a very long list of debts that had been paid. The war had ended not with a dramatic surrender or a triumphant victory celebration, but with a quiet ceremony on a scarred and wounded world. Human representatives had met with what remained of Torvani leadership and presented them with a document outlining the terms of peace. The Torvani had signed without argument. They had nothing left to argue with. On Earth, the scars of the warriors were slowly healing. The massive industrial complexes that had produced 300 warships had been converted to civilian use. The soldiers who had crewed those ships had returned home to families and lives that had been put on hold. While they pursued justice across the stars, the monuments built to remember the dead of New Haven had become places of pilgrimage, visited by millions who came to pay their respects and to remember why the war had been fought. Admiral Patricia Holloway had retired from active service 20 years ago. At 82, she walked with a slight limp from an injury sustained during the assault on the Torvani core worlds. But her mind remained sharp, and her eyes still carried the cold determination that had terrified enemies across the galaxy. She had been offered countless positions since her retirement: political offices, corporate directorships, speaking engagements worth more money than she could spend in a lifetime. She had turned them all down today on the 50th anniversary of the New Haven massacre. She stood at the memorial site on Earth, watching as thousands of people gathered to remember what had been lost and what had been won. The memorial itself was a simple thing, a wall of black stone inscribed with 12,000 names, surrounding a garden where flowers from 100 worlds bloomed in silent tribute. At the center stood a statue of a woman and child, reaching toward the stars, their bronze faces turned upward in hope and defiance. Patricia walked slowly along the wall, her fingers brushing the carved names she had long ago memorized. Each one was a person who had died because the Torvani had decided that humanity was weak, that their lives were worth less than the message their deaths would send. Each one was a reminder of why Patricia had spent 20 years of her life pursuing vengeance across the galaxy. She stopped when she reached a familiar figure standing before a cluster of names near the end of the wall. Emma Walsh, now in her 70s, her prosthetic left arm gleaming silver in the afternoon light. She had been one of the 47 survivors of New Haven, had spent years testifying about what she had witnessed, had become a symbol of human resilience and determination. The two women had never served together, but they had met many times over the years. Bound together by a shared history of loss and revenge. "Every year I come here," Emma said without turning around, "and every year I wonder if it was worth it." Patricia stood beside her, looking at the names on the wall. Worth what? All of it. The war. The destruction. The things we did to them. Emma touched one of the carved names gently. "My sister is here. And my parents. And the man I was going to marry. Sometimes I wonder what they would think of what we became." Patricia was silent for a long moment. It was a question she had asked herself many times in the quiet hours of the night. When sleep would not come and memories of burning Torvani worlds filled her thoughts. "I think they would understand," she finally said. "They died because the galaxy thought we were weak, that we would not fight back, that we would accept whatever was done to us and move on. We proved them wrong. Every species in the galaxy knows now that humanity is not to be trifled with, that our lives have value, that harming us carries a price that no one can afford to pay." Emma turned to look at her. "And that makes it worth it?" Patricia looked out at the garden, where children were playing among the flowers, laughing and running with the careless joy that only the young could possess. Human children who had grown up in a galaxy that no longer dared to threaten their kind. "Those children will never know what it feels like to be seen as prey," Patricia said quietly. "They will never have to watch broadcasts of their families being murdered while aliens laugh. They will never wake up wondering if today is the day that some powerful species decides to teach humanity a lesson." She paused. "Is that worth it? I honestly do not know. But it is what we achieved, and I cannot bring myself to regret it." Emma nodded slowly and turned back to the wall. They stood together in silence as the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the memorial garden, across the stars. The Galactic Council had established new protocols for interacting with humanity. They were no longer dismissed as primitives or treated as newcomers who had not earned their place. Among spacefaring civilizations, they were treated with respect that bordered on fear. A careful deference that every species had learned was far safer than the alternative. Elder Vorith, in the final years of his impossibly long life, had completed his memoirs. The manuscript had been translated into every language in the galaxy and distributed to every world that possessed the technology to read it. The final chapter, titled simply, "The Species That Remembers," become required reading in diplomatic academies throughout known space. It ended with words that Vorith hoped would be remembered long after he was gone. "In all my years of study, I have encountered predators and prey, conquerors and conquered, species that burned bright and faded fast, and species that endured through patience and time. But I have never encountered anything like humanity. They do not seek war, but they do not flee from it. They do not start conflicts, but they end them with a thoroughness that leaves nothing behind. They carry their grievances like sacred flames, passing them from generation to generation, never allowing the fire to dim. They build monuments to their suffering so that no one will ever forget. And they keep their promises Even when keeping them burns worlds to ash, the galaxy has learned, at terrible cost, that there are some beings you do not wrong, some debts that can never be forgiven, some enemies who will never, ever forget. Humanity is all of these things, and I thank the stars every day that they are, at last, at peace. Because if they ever find cause to rise again, I do not know what will be left when they are done. The sun set over the New Haven Memorial, painting the sky in colors of purple and gold, the same colors that had once lit the skies of a distant colony where 12,000 dreams had died. Patricia Holloway and Emma Walsh stood together in the gathering darkness, surrounded by the names of the dead and the silence of remembrance. Behind them, a new generation was growing up in a galaxy that had finally learned to respect humanity. It had taken 50 years, 300 warships, and more death than anyone cared to count, but in the end, the lesson had been taught, and no one would ever forget it.